poll out there for everyone. Hi, my name is Scott Schwarzhoff. I work at a company called Appcelerator. I'll tell you guys about that in a second. How many folks out there actually have an API that you're looking to get out on mobile devices? Just like quick show of hands. Some, a few. How many are building mobile applications today? A lot more. Okay. So, yeah. So my 10-minute talk is basically all about marrying the two of you guys up. So application developers and APIs. In essence, that's what our company does. There are a lot of other things we'll talk about, but if you think about today as really sort of this fragmentation of lots of different devices, lots of different APIs, the question is, how do you minimize that fragmentation? How do you build an outstanding application experience that has, a seamless interaction with the cloud layer? And how do you do that across multiple platforms? And how do you do that quickly and respond to your customers' needs? And that's what we do at Appcelerator. So our platform is called Appcelerator Titanium. I'm going to get into the API portion here in a second, but here in Mountain View, California, it's in essence a platform for developing mobile applications. You use web development languages, web technologies, JavaScript in particular, our favorite. So an open web technology set to build applications across multiple platforms, and then connect those into the APIs of your choice. So in essence, we're sort of matchmakers, if you will. We have about 30,000 apps built on our technology today, about 30 million devices. We get about 100 per day. So if you've downloaded Wunderlist or GetGlue, or those of you out there with your iPads, if you've downloaded the NBC iPad application, we have other apps for Kellogg's and eBay, the LA Times app, and so forth. Those are all applications built on top of Titanium, and they're all built using web languages. So it's pretty cool. And then sort of on, and I asked the question up front, do we have API developers, we have mobile developers, because we kind of serve both audiences. So today we have about 225,000 mobile developers and about, including an acquisition we made earlier in the year, about 1.5 million web developers, and that's sort of the demand side of the equation, all of those guys out there building lots of applications. And then similarly, we have the supply side, which I'll talk to you about, which is all the APIs. Before I get into that, from our perspective, when we talk publicly about sort of mobile application development, like our objectives, like what are we trying to all do here with mobile, there are basically two questions that we ask. The first is, fundamentally, how is mobile adding value to my customer relationship? So what is it about mobile? And this is typically, again, on the Appcelerator side, it's, how do you build that richness in your application? Then secondly, how do I scale? How do I reduce that fragmentation risk, if you will, right? How do I, maintain nimbleness in my organization? And this is basically the supply and the demand side of the equation here, and it'll become more clear here in a second. On the first, on how can I add value to my customer relationships, we tend to think about the world here that we're supplying all these wonderful APIs and all these services into as basically hitting on these four goals really in mobile, which is when you think about the relationship that you have with your customers, it's how do I reach new customers, how do I drive deeper engagement, how do I keep people coming back for more, drive loyalty, and how do I increase monetization. And that's the experience that we're driving on the SDK side with our software and with mobile development in general. But then there's sort of the problem statement to that, like if that's the experience that I'm trying to drive, what's the problem that I'm trying to solve for in order to achieve this goal that I think that we can all agree on. And that's really around fragmentation. So this idea that you have multiple clouds APIs, this idea that you have multiple device types, you have multiple platforms, and you have multiple skill sets. And that's basically the reality that we all face when we think about mobile. And so when we think about tackling this challenge, then we actually, our solution actually is one massive API. And actually this idea that an API can not only be a cloud-based API, it can also be a client-side API. And that when you actually think of applications today, like the ones that I mentioned at the beginning of this presentation, in essence, they're just a collection of APIs, whether they're client-side APIs accessing the camera, the database, or the UI, or they're server-side cloud APIs and accessing cool services like those that have been discussed here. And that's basically what our platform does. It's Appcelerator Titanium, integrated mobile cloud platform for enterprise mobile and consumer apps. Basically what it is cross-platform, open and extensible API. And it's fairly massive. Today we have about 3,600 methods and processes, and they basically cover the gamut of all those experiences that I just walked through. So for example, if you're looking at user experience or location or messaging or advertising, media camera, your social services, Facebook, Twitter, right? A lot of these are client-side facing APIs, API calls. And we actually expose through our API all of these services as a JavaScript, a very thin JavaScript API. And then we basically build in natively the underlying code within your application that is accessed by these APIs. And that's our client-side SDK, and then sitting on top of that is the cloud connectivity layer. And this is where the APIs, the cloud APIs, actually get really interesting. This is where you actually think about, how do I plug in, if I'm accessing all my client-side APIs, how do I plug in the cloud type of APIs? That's where we actually have an opportunity for you API developers. That's why I was asking about that question earlier. So one thing we introduced about a month ago is this thing called the Open Mobile Marketplace. What it does is it basically offers API developers a place to sell your APIs and offer your APIs as a cloud service. So what you can do is you can actually wrap your native Objective-C or your cloud-based API inside of a thin JavaScript wrapper. We have a module developer kit. And then you can expose that to our developer base. And then you can have your developers basically plug into said cloud API. So what would be a couple examples of this? Well, these would be a couple of examples. So we have PayPal, for example, or Urban Airship, or Twilio, or Bump. We also have folks that are just just creating modules as sort of they're just coming out of our ears. We have guys from Box just did a module for their API. Guys from Dropbox just did a module. We have one for Salesforce, Flurry, you get the idea. But the idea here is, and Parse actually just got added last week. But the idea here is that, 2.5 years ago we started with, building out a developer base so that you could get a lot of, plug-in points to tap into. And then now having sort of established sort of a platform for this, they need lots of good toys and things to play with. And so this is sort of the toy box. And instead of just us developing the toys, we thought we would actually open this up for everyone else to participate as well. And that's why we call it the Open Mobile Marketplace. It's a place where basically if you're an API developer, you can wrap your API, drop it inside the marketplace. If it's a cloud service, it's fine. You can offer it for free. And we have subscription endpoints that you can take part in. If you're selling that as a piece of content, we have a revenue share program. So that's, in essence, when you break it down, that's sort of the way we see the opportunity here is everything's turning into an API. You look at on the client side, it's one huge API that cross-platform allows you to be really flexible. If it's on the cloud side, again, it's a pretty interesting opportunity now for an API developer to offer your API to a bunch of other developers. I guess just the last thing, since I've got just 2 minutes left, just sort of show you one evolution of how one customer of ours has taken APIs and sort of packaged them together over a period of time, just to give you an insight into sort of where our customers go. I'll use NBC as an example. It's an evolution of an API-based mobile strategy. So we've been working with NBC now for about 1.5 years. Their NBC.com team. All the developers, because they're web developers, actually start with us, saying, look, I've got a website and I'm trying to go mobile. How do I do that? So here's one on the, we actually took them through basically, we've got a lot more apps that we've done with them, but these are 3 interesting ones. Started with Jay Leno's Garage last year, just one API, internal API, just a video feed of Jay Leno's Garage videos. That's all this app does. And if you try it out, it's not that sexy looking, but it got them familiar with what it meant to be in mobile. Out of that, then they added in some engagement factors. So they started thinking about things around their photo feeds, their blog feeds, their social feeds. They started thinking about, Dart, DoubleClick, ad publishing, started thinking about Omniture for analytics, basically cloud services that they could plug in. And so in essence, what's happening here with this customer is that they're starting to think about their business, in essence, as a service-oriented business. And whether it's them providing their own service to themselves or assimilating services from out in the ethosphere, from you guys, from API developers, that's in essence what they're building. And all of this actually manifested itself actually in the NBC iPad app. which last month hit #1 in the App Store. And they were able to, what's interesting is once you get into sort of an API-based approach, and you say, what is the ultimate goal of the APIs? I would actually argue that the goal of it is actually to reduce the fragmentation level that's inherent in mobile and reduce the plumbing that is associated with actually doing all the nasty, gnarly back-end stuff so that you can focus on an outstanding user experience, so that you can focus on that engagement that I talked about at the beginning. And once again, if we think about the goals of mobile, it is typically around those 4 areas. It's increasing reach, it's driving deeper engagement, getting people coming back for more, that's the loyalty piece, and increasing monetization. And the only way we're ever going to get there is if we reduce the fragmentation, if we turn everything into an API, we create APIs that then allow us to reduce that plumbing and keep that iterative sort of innovation spark, if you will, at the forefront of our minds. That's basically where NBC is now, a company that's made the move from the web to mobile and is trying to push the envelope there and reduce the plumbing, and they're doing it primarily through APIs. So I'll just kind of leave with that customer. I'm happy to answer any other questions during the Q&A session, but my 10 minutes are up in 3 seconds. So there we go.